Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates around the country. If it's happening out there, we're going to bring it to you live right here in Studio 55. Let's begin with the shocking vision for the Middle East that President Trump has laid out, including a complete U.S. takeover of the Gaza Strip. What exactly he's proposing and the reaction from the region and around the world. Plus, chaos and confusion at the FBI, what we know about the new lawsuit, and some agents who just filed a lawsuit against the Justice Department. And remember Sharpiegate? Think back to President Trump's first term in 2019 when someone apparently used a Sharpie to alter the course of Hurricane Dorian. Actually, I'm being facetious. They didn't alter anything. They just drew on a map. Well, one of the scientists who defended Trump and contradicted meteorologists in the process was just appointed lead of NOAA. We're going to discuss the potential impact on the agency. This is CBS News 24/7.
We're all dead.
All right, we got to begin with this. The international community is reacting to President Trump's statement that the United States should take over the Gaza Strip. He made the comments during a joint news conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. The president laid out a plan to move millions of Palestinians who live there and develop the area. Listen.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site.
CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi is live from Washington. Olivia, the reaction that we're hearing from world leaders, including our allies, are not in favor of what the president is suggesting. Has the White House had any reaction to what the rest of the world is saying?
Yeah, good morning to you, Vlad. No reaction from the White House just yet on the reaction from the international community to Trump's remarks last night. But it's important to remember that before he even made those remarks about the U.S. takeover of Gaza, our allies in the region had already rejected the idea of relocating those more than 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza. I just want to read to you some of the reaction we saw from our closest allies in the region. Egypt's foreign ministry last night said that the rebuilding of Gaza stressed the need for rebuilding Gaza without moving Palestinians out of the country. Saudi Arabia, one of our most important allies in that region. Also, Trump called the Crown Prince as his first phone call of his second administration. They released a statement last night, very strongly worded statement, that called for an independent Palestinian state and said it would be a firm, steadfast, and unwavering position of that kingdom. So important to note that all of our allies in that region are firmly against what Trump is proposing here. But take a listen to what Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, said this morning to CBS about why this is the U.S. position currently.
When you have 2 million people living on what has become miles of rubble that's completely unlivable, to say we're going to rebuild with them sitting there, I think is incredible. Just again, the reality of it is incredibly difficult. But back to your point on Hamas, and this is where we have a shared vision and we have shared objectives with the Israeli government. Hamas cannot stay there.
The argument we've been hearing from the White House that there's no way to rebuild Gaza while the Palestinian people are still there. But obviously our allies in the region say there's nowhere else for them to go, and they are in favor of them staying there while that rebuilding process is ongoing.
So the reason why Gaza is in rubble, and let's separate the actions of the terrorist organization Hamas from the Palestinian people who are now returning to the rubble, is because the Israelis have leveled it in their attempt to root out Hamas. So Mike Waltz's statement that the people are living in these conditions and why wouldn't they want to live in better conditions, certainly that's absolutely true. But to secure that part of the world, you will need boots on the ground and perhaps not Israeli boots. So is the Trump administration preparing to send U.S. troops to Gaza, given that, as you know, Olivia, having covered the campaign, part of his campaign statements and rallies and slogans had to do with the United States taking a step back from meddling in international affairs with the U.S. military?
It's an excellent point, Vlad. Trump's not ruling it out right now. Even last night, he said, as far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what's necessary. If it's necessary in regards to bringing troops there, he said, we'll do that. But as you point out, this is the most isolationist president we've had in the last several decades. So for him to say something like we would meddle in those affairs and send troops over there certainly doesn't square with where he has been previously on a lot of international issues. So really important distinction to note there, but it's certainly something that would require a little bit more than just an executive order or a writing of the pen to send troops over there. This would require an act of Congress, an authorized use of military force, something that Democrats have been calling for in Congress, saying that if that's something he wants to do and to go down that route, then he needs to go over to Capitol Hill and plead his case.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi reporting from Washington for us this morning. Thanks, Olivia. For more international reaction to the president's statements, I want to bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger. Robert, you just heard from Olivia some of the reaction we've received from not only our allies in the Middle East, but from others all around the world. I'm curious if the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and others in the region say, and have been on the record for many, many years, saying that they cannot absorb an influx of Palestinian immigrants into their countries, into those nations. Where are those people to go?
Yeah, well, that's the big question. And, you know, Jordan and Egypt really aren't in a position to take hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from Gaza, even though they do have a lot of land in the Sinai Peninsula and Jordan. Their economies couldn't absorb hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And then, of course, there's the danger of radicalization of that population, which could bring instability to those U.S. allies. So that is the question. There really is no place for them to go. But I suppose President Trump is thinking, well, let's offer them a place to go. And instead of rubble in Gaza, that they can get an apartment somewhere. But of course, you need the cooperation of U.S. allies to do that.
So, Robert, I'm curious what the reaction within Israel has been. We know what the Saudis are saying, what the Egyptians are saying. We've had reaction from Turkey. We've certainly had reaction from China. And again, it just sort of makes me think about how things kick off throughout world history, right? Things that may seem to be moments that require sort of thoughtful thinking and geopolitical strategy end up being minor flicks of flame that turn into world wars. And so I'm just curious what people are saying within Israel about the possibility, for example, of U.S. troops entering Gaza to somehow remove 2 million people from that part of the world.
Yeah, as far as U.S. troops, I think there hasn't been a lot of reaction to that because people in Israel don't really see that happening right away. But as far as the concept of the idea of displacing or, removing these 1.5 million or 2 million Palestinians from Gaza to other countries, that's gotten some positive reaction in the Israeli government, which is a right-wing government. The far right says, let's put to bed the idea of a Palestinian state and move out the Palestinians. But even more moderates in that government from Netanyahu's Likud party think it's time to start thinking outside the box. And we've even heard some centrist opposition members saying this idea is worth considering, at least as a starting point.
So then if it's not U.S. troops on the ground, then we're, I guess, essentially speculating that it would be Israeli troops that would somehow be taking part in whatever this looks like. I can't imagine what it looks like to forcibly remove 2 million people from a region. And so what does that mean for the very delicate treaties that exist between the Israeli government and other countries, for example, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia? If the idea of a two-state solution is completely off the table, I wonder what happens then.
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be a problem as far as President Trump's his vision is to bring in Saudi Arabia and extend the Abraham Accords, which happened under his previous administration, peace with countries like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. He wants to extend that to Saudi Arabia. They've said that that won't happen without a Palestinian state being created. But, it's possible that once the shock, this is sort of a shock and awe kind of a proposal. And maybe now it'll be at least a starting point for some kind of discussion and trying to find some way to reach a solution that might not include at least the traditional idea of a Palestinian state. But as we've said, that's not acceptable to the Arab world right now.
And so has there been any appetite, Robert, for perhaps a different approach, one that was taken by the United States and her allies in the wake of World War II? Mortal enemies, the United States, Germany, United States, Japan, our allies, rather than forcibly removing the Japanese from their homeland, or what the United States did under the Marshall Plan was to try and rebuild those countries, try to bring about a sense of government much like our own. And they were, as you know, were wildly successful in doing that. Is there any appetite for something like that where we say, hey, let's rebuild Gaza, let's put hotels up if that's the plan, but let's do that with the intention of keeping the Palestinians, those who live in Gaza, there?
That was actually the idea under the Biden administration. Nobody talked about removing a couple of million Palestinians from their homes. And so the idea was, who is going to rule Gaza after Hamas? Now, Hamas, by the way, still hasn't agreed to step down, and it's still in power, as we've seen from the recent hostage releases. Hamas is still in control. So the idea of the Biden idea was to get an alternative government in there, including, maybe some Arab states and the Palestinian Authority. But we heard President Trump say last night that the Palestinian Authority has failed in the West Bank, and he doesn't see a role for it in Gaza.
All right, Robert Berger, always great to have your insight, your analysis, and your reporting, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi will be sworn in today. She takes over the Department of Justice a day after multiple federal lawsuits were filed by FBI agents and employees who investigated January 6th. They are trying to stop the public release of their names as part of a new DOJ investigation into the Capitol riot prosecutions. Let's bring in CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, I recall during Pam Bondi's confirmation hearing, she was asked very specifically about these types of situations. In other words, using politics as retribution for the work that the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was conducting at the request, certainly, of the Department of Justice and the Attorney General Merrick Garland. She indicated that the Department of Justice would not be used in a political fashion. So how is she considering what is happening right now at the FBI?
This is quite a 24 hours, Vlad. A new attorney general is going to walk into the building today, take over the reins of the nation's law enforcement apparatus, bring in likely a whole bunch of new staff who we will see for the first time today. And she's doing it during a day in which the FBI is in turmoil. She's coming in amid a political and a professional brush fire. The FBI has 5,000 or so of its agents and employees who are worried their names are on a list that is circulating inside Pam Bondi's new agency, and that it is at risk of being leaked or released to the public, putting them on a target list for harassment, threats, and violence, including their families. That's the first day Pam Bondi is walking into. A reminder about these lawsuits that have been filed against the Department of Justice by some of their own FBI agents. They allege that the Department of Justice has required their names to be named as part of the January 6th investigation, and that list is going to be sent to the bosses at the Department of Justice for possible employment actions, possible firings or forced resignations simply for being part of that investigation. They say it's a violation of their privacy, a violation of due process, but most vitriolically in their lawsuits, they're arguing that they're now a target list, that people will come after them for being part of the January 6th investigations. Pam Bondi will have to get her hands around that issue and what to do next with that list and those lawsuits as she approaches the new job as the nation's Attorney General.
Yeah, Scott, it sort of is just, I don't know, to me it's commonsensical that you would not want to release those names of those agents unless the goal was as they are suggesting for them to be targeted, either on social media or by people who would seek to do them harm. And also, I wonder if the Attorney General, I'm sure she's considering this, what this might do to recruiting efforts. If you are going to join an organization, and let's remember, Scott, as you know better than I do, these agents are not just working on this one thing. These agents are involved in their careers in multiple investigations, oftentimes undercover, to go after some really, really, really bad people. The idea of putting their names out there for all the public to know is something that she's going to have to grapple with, in addition to what that might mean for recruiting efforts down the line.
This is an absolute, utter mess. In the past 72 hours or so have really broken some of the faith in this institution. It can't be repaired quickly, no matter what happens next. Whether Pam Bondi decides to release publicly the names of all the FBI employees who were part of the January 6 investigations, or whether Pam Bondi takes out that piece of paper, crinkles it up and throws it in a trash can and says, we're done with this type of stuff. No matter what happens next, there's already been damage incurred. There's been a message sent to FBI employees nationwide, according to sources speaking with CBS News, that you have to be careful what cases you investigate moving forward, that they can't displease the president or his close allies. That is a chilling message that goes against the DNA of the FBI, and it's been sent already, no matter what happens next. But your argument is, if you're Pam Bondi, is what good is there in releasing this list? Maybe there's a political advantage to it. Maybe there's a mandate to do it. But the practical impact is potentially catastrophic for those agents and their day job, which is part of terror task forces, child trafficking units, gun units, violent crime units. They are distracted, and potentially you could lose them from those vital missions.
All right, Scott, before we let you go quickly, you've got some new reporting on threats being made to members of Congress. Tell me about that.
Oh, by the way, threats against the Congress and the U.S. Capitol complex have hit a new high in 2024. More than 9,000 of them have been investigated by U.S. Capitol Police, according to an investigation by CBS News and a federal report issued. That's up from 8,008 in 2023, the largest number for a single year on record for the Capitol Police, save for 1 year, 2021, which is a bit of a different kind of year because of the insurrection. This is 3 times more threat investigations than Capitol Police had just 7 or 8 years ago. They are trying to figure out how to deal with that fire hose, how to protect members of Congress at what is clearly a distinctively toxic and politically violent moment.
Boy, oh boy, the shroud of the dark side has fallen. Scott McFarland reporting for us. Thank you very much. All right, an ice storm is barreling across the U.S. It's on track to bring blustery conditions from the Ohio Valley to the Northeast. More than 96 million people are under winter storm threats right now, with several inches of ice and snow expected to fall. We'll bring you the very latest forecast just ahead. Meanwhile, the first group of migrants has landed at Guantanamo Bay as legal questions mount over the president's plan to deport migrants to that facility. We're going to discuss next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Now to a CBS News exclusive, ICE is releasing some migrant detainees because facilities holding them are too full. That's according to the Department of Homeland Security data obtained by CBS News. The spike in arrests in the last few weeks has led to prisons and county jails reaching 109% capacity. About 160 migrants were released on Monday. ICE did not comment on the releases, but says it's planning to request more space and funding to house those migrant detainees. The White House has confirmed the arrival of the first deportation flights from the U.S. at Guantanamo Bay. The administration acknowledged yesterday that the first plane carrying migrants from the U.S. mainland had touched down at the infamous detention facility. The plan calls for as many as 30,000 people to be sent there. CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson joins us now to talk about it. So, Ellie, you just got back from a trip to Guantanamo Bay yourself. What did you see? What are you hearing about the president's plan to hold 30,000 people there? Just explain how it would work. I mean, would you be there indefinitely? Like, is it just a holding area before you get on to your next destination? What's the plan?
Yeah, well, Guantanamo Bay, though it may have the physical space to hold the migrants that President Trump is proposing, it's going to take a lot of time and probably a lot of money to build the infrastructure to hold them humanely. The flight last night contained just about 10 detainees. They were considered high threat by the U.S. government, so they're going to go into an already existing secure detention facility. They'll be separate from the 15 detainees that are still held there as war on terror prisoners, but these new 10 detainees will still be held in cells. Now, on the other side of the island, there is a migrant, or the other side of the base, there is a migrant operations center that has held migrants in the past. But as of early last week, officials I spoke to said that that center only had the capacity for about 100 to 150 beds. Now, over the weekend, the Pentagon did send about 300 Marines to start building up tents to provide additional capacity. As of yesterday, those Marines had built about tents to hold about 1,000 migrants.
So logistics aside, just give me a sense of what the legal concerns are that people have raised over sending people to a place like Gitmo. I mean, I know that they're not American citizens, but we do have an obligation to treat people humanely. This, to me, almost sounds like an internment camp.
There are questions that Pentagon lawyers and the Department of Homeland Security lawyers are looking at, like how long, as you raised, how long can these detainees be held there? The idea is they cannot be held there indefinitely, but what is an appropriate amount of time? Other questions are how will they have access, what kind of access will they have to legal services and social services? Now, as I said, migrants have been held at Guantanamo Bay before, but those migrants were largely people who were intercepted at sea. They had never made it to the United States. So this situation is different. These migrants are coming from the United States where the immigration system would afford them certain rights. And you could argue that those rights will be interfered with just by the remoteness of Guantanamo Bay.
All right, Ellie Watson reporting from the Pentagon for us this morning. Ellie, thank you. All right, nearly all USAID workers worldwide are being pulled off the job as President Trump also spends billions of dollars worth of foreign aid from flowing. We're going to discuss the short and long-term impacts next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. In Ohio, police are searching for the person who they believe carried out a targeted shooting in a warehouse last night. One person was killed and 5 others were injured. The incident occurred at a facility in New Albany, that's just northeast of Columbus. Police say they have a person of interest and have recovered the firearm at the scene. In Virginia, the remains of all 67 people killed in last week's midair collision have been pulled from the Potomac River near Washington, D.C. Parts of the American Airlines plane and the Army helicopter that were involved in the crash were also removed from the water. The NTSB says data shows the chopper was flying at an altitude of about 300 feet at the time of the collision. That's about 100 feet higher than it was supposed to be flying. Officials in Sweden are trying to figure out a motive in what the country's prime minister calls the worst mass shooting in the nation's history. At least 10 people were killed in yesterday's attack in an adult education center, which is over 100 miles west of Stockholm. Police say the gunman was also killed. Authorities don't believe the shooting is terrorism related, and they say that the gunman acted alone. Okay, following the Trump administration's 90-day pause on foreign aid, the UN has warned that without U.S. support, there could be over 1,000 maternal deaths in Afghanistan from now through 2028. It has been more than 3 years since the U.S. military withdrew from the country. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayeb is in Kabul to see what life is like under Taliban rule.
Well, we've been invited on a ride-along with the Taliban police through the streets of Kabul, and the difference in this city in the 3.5 years since the takeover is extraordinary. Back then, when the U.S. and other allied forces were here, on almost every street corner there would have been a military checkpoint. There was also miles and miles of concrete blast walls, which are now all gone. And many of the Afghans that we've been speaking to say the situation here in this country is so much better, so much safer. Still, when it comes to the rights of women, that of course has been devastating for them as they see their rights eroded really year after year. And of course, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan continues to remain bleak as the economy here remains isolated from the world. whatever the case, President Trump, on the eve of his inauguration, made a pretty pointed statement towards the Taliban, saying that he wanted to see the around $7 billion or so of U.S. military hardware that was left behind by the Biden administration returned back to the U.S. We spoke to the Taliban leadership and asked them if they were going to do just that. And they said, no chance. Back to you.
MTS, thank you very much. We want to bring you now back to our top story as the international community reacts to President Trump's comments that the United States should take over the Gaza Strip and rebuild it. In another move yesterday, the United States has withdrawn from the United Nations Human Rights Council and has ended funding for Palestinian relief agency UNRWA. I want to bring in Reuters White House reporter Jeff Mason to talk about this. Jeff, it's good to see you. So UNRWA has been a controversial topic, with the Israelis claiming that it has employed members who supported Hamas. But talk about the impact that what the United States is doing, what impact that could have on the agency.
It has been a controversial group, and President Biden, President Trump's predecessor, also did put a pause on funding after it was found that there were members of UNRWA who were part of the October 7th attacks on Israel. So there is some bipartisan concern about the organization. But to your broader question, Vlad, it is an organization that provides aid to Palestinians, hundreds of millions of dollars worth. So it's been a critical group in helping a population that has certainly been suffering quite a bit in these last couple of years and before. But you're right to mention the controversy. It is also a group that President Trump, during his first term, paused funding on. So this is not an unusual step for this Republican president.
So, Jeff, let's also talk about the action that's been taken against USAID. I think it's fascinating to me to look at the people on the internet who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about when it comes to understanding how this agency was created and what is happening at this very moment. I want you to provide some clarity for our audience. Yes, the agency was created by executive order under President Kennedy, but Congress many years later made it an official agency. Just explain that so people understand exactly what's going on here and what the role of Congress would be if you were to completely disband it.
Well, that's exactly right. It is an independent agency and supported by law. And if the president wants to completely shut it down or move it into the State Department, which is what his stated goal has been, then he'll need Congress to help him do that by passing a law along the same lines. That is not inconsistent with another agency that he's trying to close, which is the Department of Education. And we're expecting an executive order on that coming up fairly soon as well. But he can't just do it by fiat. He can't just do it with an order. Congress has to play ball. And not everyone in the Senate is going to be on board with that. In general, also to your broader question, USAID is an aid organization that provides life-saving service, funding and volunteering and aid work around the globe. And there's just a big question mark now over the impact that this is going to have, not to mention the impact on the workers who have been recalled or put on leave.
Jeff Mason, always great to have you to provide that reporting and that clarity we sorely need. We appreciate it, my friend. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. The former acting head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration may get his job back. President Trump has nominated Dr. Neil Jacobs to lead NOAA. During Trump's first administration, Jacobs was found guilty of violating NOAA's code of ethics after he altered a hurricane forecast that was later dubbed Sharpiegate. You'll recall he used a Sharpie, right? CBS News national environmental correspondent David Schechter spoke with a former NOAA chief scientist about the fallout.
Hurricane Dorian, early September 2019. Sunday, the Weather Service forecasted the storm to move up the Atlantic coast. President Trump tweeted that Alabama was in the storm's path, but it wasn't. 20 minutes later, the National Weather Service in Alabama accurately tweeted, Alabama will not see any impacts from Dorian, and that contradicted the president. Wednesday, with Hurricane Dorian still approaching, Trump held up a 7-day-old map altered with a black marker, making it look like Alabama was in the hurricane's path. The controversy became known as Sharpiegate.
That was the original chart, and you see it was going to hit not only Florida, but Georgia could have was going toward the Gulf.
By Friday, without McClain's knowledge, the leadership at NOAA released a statement backing Trump and criticizing the work of the weather forecasters.
To have a political process unplug the public's trust, that got me stirred. That gave me a sense of rage.
McClain demanded investigations, and they concluded that the statement was driven by external political pressure through a request from the White House then acting chief of staff and violated NOAA's scientific integrity policy. McClain requested NOAA's top leaders acknowledge the investigative findings, and shortly after, he was relieved of his position.
And Craig McClain lost that position as the acting director of science at NOAA, did remain on at NOAA and was able to retire, and now he is in public life.
David, this smacks to me of Soviet-era tactics. In other words, the water is clean. Don't believe the scientists. We're telling you to drink it. So the question, of course, becomes, what is the Trump administration said about the future of NOAA, given that politics is clearly becoming a major focus of almost every institution in this country?
Great line of questioning there. So Howard Lutnick is this gentleman who has been had hearings to be the Commerce Secretary, or this department sits under Commerce, and he has said, although the Project 2025, which is the roadmap for the Trump administration, calls to break up NOAA, he says he has no plans to break up NOAA. But even looking at this story of Sharpie Gate, it almost feels a little bit quaint because the impacts overall were not enormous to NOAA during the first Trump administration, sort of outside of things like this. But it does appear that that might have just been an opening salvo, that the intentions here are much deeper on taking on climate science and taking on NOAA. But so far the word is want to keep it the same. We'll just obviously have to see if that's what they follow through with.
Right, because as we were just discussing, we've seen politics now take root in all of these institutions that have protected Americans for many years. The Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Education when it comes to educating our children. So people may not know exactly. It's easy to decipher what the EPA does or the Department of Education does. Explain to our viewers what NOAA is responsible for and how science plays a role in informing us, the public, about what's happening in our atmosphere.
I mean, they're responsible for basically weather science, the National Weather Service. They're responsible for climate science, letting us know how the climate is changing, documenting that, making sure it's included in policy, and how are we going to attack climate change. So this is one of the central science organizations in the United States government. A lot of people don't know what it is, and you're right, but the work that they do is critical to underpinning alerts for hurricanes like we saw in Dorian, or letting us know that the ocean is getting warmer, or letting us know that our atmosphere is getting warmer. And this is bedrock science done by scientists who have heretofore been shielded from politics, long-term scientists who are there administration after administration after administration. And now to try to remove some of those people and put in loyalists who are more in line with what the Trump administration would want to do changes the way we think about the kind of ongoing science that happens inside the government.
All right. David Schechter reporting for us. Thank you very much, David, for that clarity. Appreciate it. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Good morning, Vlad. Starting off by watching a developing storm system. It will start in the nation's heartland, but when you look at it at face value right now, it doesn't look like much. However, when we do put on all of the winter weather alerts across the country, we got a lot of people in the path of this developing storm. You got winter weather advisories stretching all the way from the Midwest across the Great Lakes and then into the Northeast, which right here below me is an ice storm warning. I told you it doesn't look like much right now. In fact, I've got the radar on. You look out towards the Midwestern states, there's not much. We've got snow across the northern tier states. That's not the developing storm system. This developing storm system will start to take shape as we go through the day today. And this is going to be a nasty mixture of winter weather, from snow to ice, freezing rain, and then rain to the south. So there's our winter weather advisories. 96 million people impacted by this storm. as we go through the next few days. Here's the track. As we put it all into motion, we go forward in time today. Look at this. We see the rain developing out of the mid-Mississippi Valley. You've got snow to the north. You've got rain right here through the Ohio Valley. And then you've got that mixture of freezing rain and then snow to the north as it travels east of the Appalachians into the Northeast as we go into the day tomorrow. This will have a huge impact on travel, where some places could see over a ½ inch of that freezing rain. When you get more than a ½ inch of freezing rain, that's when you really get into trouble. And the places that we're watching is really central Pennsylvania into areas like eastern West Virginia, western Maryland. That's where we could see that significant ice accretion. Again, you get a 1/10 to a 1/4 of an inch. There may be some slippery roads, but once you start working up towards a ½ inch of that ice, difficult travel, branches start coming down, you start looking at more widespread power outages. Over a ½ inch, that's really dangerous conditions, not for heading out, but also you really start to see those power lines and those tree limbs come down. Now, north of that icing area, that's where we're going to see some snow, 2 to 4, maybe upwards closer to 6 inches of snow in upstate New York into places like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Vlad, that's all over the next couple of days. We've got another storm system in the works as we go into the weekend. Back to you.
Saying ain't so. Grant Gilmore, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up, a group of transgender teens and their families are suing President Trump over his gender-affirming care ban. We'll explore their case next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. President Trump is expected to sign an executive order today banning transgender athletes from competing in girls' or women's sports. It is the latest in a series of orders impacting the trans community, including an executive order banning gender-affirming care for those under 19 years old. Now, some hospitals in several states have paused those treatments while evaluating the order. A group of trans and young adults and their parents have now filed a lawsuit to block that ban. CBS News national correspondent Lana Zach is here in Studio 55. Good to see you, my friend.
Great to be with you, Vlad.
So let's talk about this executive order on trans care. What does it say?
So there are two executive orders that we're talking about. The first one was shortly after President Trump came into office. That's the one on trans care. That's the one that the judge is potentially blocking, that these applicants have asked about. The other one that's going to happen today is about trans athletes and their ability to participate in sports. So the White House is telling CBS News that that's not about transgender as much as it is, in their words, keeping men out of women's sports. But this particular executive order, it says it's a policy of the United States that will not fund, sponsor, promote, assist, or support the so-called transition of a child from one sex to another. And it will rigorously enforce all laws that prohibit or limit these destructive and life-altering procedures. And that's the one that 7 transgender people have sued.
So one of the things that I've started to see are people who perhaps did not vote for this administration, who live in states where they're typically blue, and they are thinking to themselves, I'm okay because I happen to live in a state that may not suffer the repercussions of what the president is trying to do. How does this differ from state to state?
So there's already differences. 26 states already have bans on providing this type of care to
bans on providing.
Right. So limitations. 37%, I believe, of 39% of trans youth already live in a state that have limited access to transitioning and hormone blockers and that type of care. But this would be on a national level. And so that would actually change in many ways the dynamics for people in those blue states.
One of the things I'm curious about, and you may not know this, but I always think about when it comes to this issue over trans athletes, I understand both sides of the argument, but
it is a difficult...
It's a very nuanced one.
Exactly.
It's sometimes not spoken about with nuance in the way that we would want it to be. But I also wonder how big of an issue is this? And I don't mean issue in a negative way. I mean, how many communities are affected by somebody who's transitioned, who wants to play in a sport that they...
Based off of our politics, it is outsized
exactly.
in terms of
it feels like it's like everywhere, but it really is not.
Exactly. And somebody said recently that this is a solution in search of a problem, because it's not a widespread problem. Now, if you are a top athlete and you feel like the person you're competing against has an unfair advantage, to you it's going to be something that's very personal. If you are the parent of a transgender child, you want your child to feel like they can participate fully in society and in their school and in sports. So for those individuals, it is deeply personal. But for people who are not directly affected, it is a less pervasive problem given how much we talk about it. There are very few transgender athletes that would actually be affected by this, but for those that are, it's significant.
Lana Zach doing the important reporting for us this morning. Good to see you in New York, too. Yeah, thank you very much. All right, coming up, we're going to take you to New Orleans as the anticipation and excitement builds for Super Bowl 59. Lana, are you excited?
Always excited.
You should read this tease then. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Just a few days away from Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans, and strong security measures are in place ahead of the big game. More than 2,000 law enforcement personnel will be in the city for the game. President Trump announced that he will be in attendance on Sunday. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca, who's here to talk about it. Okay, I see a Madden cruiser behind you. I know John Madden passed away a couple of years ago, so I'm wondering what goes on in there. But also talk to me about what the president attending the game means for the preparations.
Well, just to reference that bus, Vlad, it's a Madden cruiser, and Bill Belichick will be on that bus. This just kind of shows all the stuff that goes around the Super Bowl. Yeah, the game is on Sunday, but there's just a myriad of events with celebrities and stars and players and whatnot that goes on around it. And that's why it gets the top tier for security when it comes to the federal government. It's called a Tier 1. So you have federal, state, local, all working together. You mentioned 2,000, officers will be here. We have 200 state troopers. We've already seen state National Guard in the French Quarter, armed in uniform, manning areas with bollards and jersey barriers left and right. And it's not just on the ground. You have people a little bit higher up. New Orleans police is going to have their horse division out. There's a lot of bomb sniffing dogs that are out here with DHS. This may be the most secure city in the U.S., and it'll get more secure, especially since the president is coming on Sunday.
So, Omar, I'm told that you are taking a helicopter tour later today. Hard life, my friend.
Yeah, it is for work. We're going up with DHS, and it's interesting what they're telling us because DHS will control the airspace from the ground 1 mile up when things get locked down. After that mile, it's the U.S. military. We're hearing jets flying overhead. We're seeing V-22 Ospreys fly around. There's a ton of military aircraft, some of them it's around here anyway, but more so when you have one of these Tier 1 events where you have tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people in town for this, VIPs, the president included. So we're going to be touring. They're going to show us kind of some of their security detail. They can't fully tip their hand, obviously. We know that there will be snipers in places in different spots in the city and non-uniform law enforcement everywhere. But they're not hiding that there's a heavy law enforcement present. Everybody is in their uniform, is out walking around, saying hi to everybody. That's what they want people to see. And if anybody has any bad ideas, they'll see that.
Right. That's a good idea. Omar Villafranca, who are you rooting for?
I'm going to kind of lean towards the Chiefs. I know it may not be popular. I'm going to lean towards the Chiefs.
Why is it not popular? No one here in New York likes Philly.
Well, listen, I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. I mean, can you imagine me cheering for Philly? I couldn't go home.
Well, wouldn't want that. All right, Omar Villafranca for us. Thanks, Omar. Appreciate it. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the last look at the national forecast. Hey, Philly, Grant, but I love you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, now you want to talk to me, huh? Right. Don't worry, we got enough Philly fans here for the Birds to go around, so we'll be just fine. We're looking forward to Sunday, even though there are some haters out there. We can handle it. All right, let's talk about the winter storm underway here. We've got winter weather advisories from Oklahoma to New England. 96 million people underneath the threat of this developing storm system that will take shape as we go through the day today. Rain across the south this morning, but watch as we go through the next 24 hours. We'll see freezing rain, snow accumulations. That nasty wintry mix is going to cause a lot of travel disruption into the day tomorrow. That continues through Thursday before clearing the coast as we go into Friday. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. Love you, brother. Appreciate it. It does it for me, folks, but stay right where you are. Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the news breaking coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.